Hello everyone, I'm Terry McDermott, Director of Careers and Head of Oxbridge at Surbiton. Hopefully you will have accessed your Morrisby profile in advance of this. Don't worry too much if you're not looking at it while you're looking around your Morrisby profile. It's probably best to just pay attention to what I'm saying, and then that it should help you while you navigate the profile. Although it is fairly self-explanatory in some respects, it is quite a in-depth tool, so I'm hopefully going to help you understand some of the things that might not be as apparent, or highlight some of the most important things, and also talk about kind of like how you logically navigate the web space. You can ask questions throughout the session. We are having some issues with the Q&A. Therefore I may not answer the questions as you go. Mr. Wright, there's someone saying that has the session started yet? I don't see anything. Maybe that's already been sorted. The question, do year 11 parents need to be here? I'd say it depends. I mean, I'd say it's useful, but we recommend that both parents and students go. Okay, in terms of some of the other questions, they'll hopefully be answered as we go through the session. If I spot anything particularly worth mentioning through the session, I'll deal with them then. Otherwise, I'll deal with them at the end. And if I don't answer anything, you can follow up after the session if necessary. Okay, just to say, the Morrisby psychometric is very well established. It's been knocking around for 50 years. It's BPS, British Psychological Society approved, which means that it's gone through a lot of robust testing. So when people ask me about, well, what's the evidence that this works, it's that it is BPS accredited, and it's used by lots of illustrious schools, as well as all the state schools in the state of Victoria in Australia, interestingly enough. So I'm going to just start with a little bit about Surbiton, our kind of sixth form stats, because actually the Morrisby, it plays a big role in supporting some of the things we're really good at in our sixth form. So you may be aware of some of these stats already, but in case not, it's worth reminding people. 90%, circa 9% of our students go on to Russell Group or top 10 universities, and many of those who don't go, they are going to top art schools or music conservatoires. So, you know, in terms of university destinations, we're a very successful school. That also applies to places like Oxbridge. We've had an average of 8 Oxbridge offers between 2018 and 21. And actually, that's actually 2016 to 21. So actually, it's even longer than that. We've had strong Oxbridge outcomes. And that is in a context where most independent schools have seen their Oxbridge outcomes go down. Our medical school success rate is very high as well. It's near 100% or at 100% year after year, meaning students get at least one offer. And our value add A level is leading in the area, which means that students outperform in their A levels where you would expect from their GCSEs. And given our value add at GCSE is very high, that's a real achievement. And part of that reason, part of this success is because of the guidance that the students get with their A-level choices, and that is, as I'll come on to later, facilitated by the Morrisby profile. In terms of what the Morrisby is trying to achieve, so it's designed to help you make choices about subjects that are useful to study. So that's probably A-levels, IB subjects, courses that might be worth pursuing at university, and ultimately where that leads in terms of career choices. But it's important to note that career decision making is not a one-off event. You know, there may be parents watching who have changed careers many times. Maybe the first career they went into, they thought that was the right thing for them, and actually experience led them to change their mind. So it's important to note that having a life plan, sometimes events get in the way. So the Morrisby profile, the online tool, is really adaptable to that. So there are lots of things that you can update in your Morrisby. You can redo, for example, the aspiration section in order to reflect how you're evolving as a person. So you might do things like work experience, you might speak to people, you might go on a university careers event or something that causes your views about the future to change, and you can always go back to the Morrisby and update it in light of the person that you then are. Note that the Morrisby doesn't purport to be some all-encompassing tool that tells you what you should do with your life. It can't do that, and it's particularly not good at doing that for things that are what they term talent, such as singing, dancing, and acting. So if those things come up in your Morrisby profile, it's not because it's somehow ascertained that you're the next Olivia Colman. I mean, you could be the hammier than a gammon steak in your acting, and it might suggest acting because that's something that you specified in your interest questionnaire. So be aware of that, and likewise, if you see the career suggestions, you think I don't agree with these, really the Morrisby is a tool for discussion. It is definitely not a list, a summary of you as a complete person on a page. It's more a tool to help us discuss yourself, your talents, your strengths, your weaknesses, your values. It's more of a launch pad rather than an endpoint in itself. Now, you tend to find students are one of two types. There are those who know what they want to do, and in that case, the Morrisby is helping answer these questions. So just have a look at those. And then you've got the student who has no idea what they want to do, and in that sense, it's trying to assess their strengths, personality, interests, and give them some ideas to explore through research, work experience, talking to people. So when you go into your Morrisby profile, and if you're watching on a laptop and you've got your iPad there, you can do this. On the home page, you will see like a summary page. I'm going to mainly go into the different sections, but just be aware that the students can share access to the Morrisby profile by granting parental access at the bottom there. Just follow the instructions. It's fairly self-explanatory, but it is up to the student to share the results. It is, I mean, from a confidentiality point of view, that's the situation. So if you want to share with your parents, then please do so through that tab at the bottom. Now, if you click the About Me section at the top, the first thing you'll see is aptitudes, okay? And you'll see 5 scores there. What you'll notice is that there'll be a text box at the bottom which says interpretation, and that explains what these results mean. It's particular to you. That is not generic, that is particular to you, and it talks through your pattern. And in fact, and I'm going to come back to this theme again and again, often it is the pattern of the profile where you are relatively stronger, where your strengths are, which is more important than your absolute level of performance. Okay, it's where you're stronger and then potentially pursuing things in areas that align with your strengths that's the important thing. So the first test that students did, and students, I apologize if you've seen some of these before, it will that will change as we progress, but it's important that maybe your parents and also you have a refresher on how these results have been arrived at. The first score that you saw was your verbal score, and that looks at kind of your comfort with numbers, comfort with words. It's designed to assess how people deal with words, and that could be written or spoken. So if you've got a high score there, it may indicate you're a good writer. It doesn't necessarily indicate that, but it probably suggests you like words, whether that is in a written or spoken format. And it can be useful in occupations where the spoken word or the written word is needed. So that could be everything from law to teaching, and it could be relevant to things like considering humanities A levels. But as I said before, it doesn't necessarily indicate you're a good writer. So I wouldn't be surprised if someone had a predominant high score here and was a good essay writer, but it isn't definitive. It's suggestive, but not definitive. The numerical reasoning, that looks more at your comfort with numbers. So verbal looked at comfort with words, numerical looks at comfort with numbers. However, that does not necessarily mean that how good you are at maths. So you may be very good at maths and have a very high numerical score, but you can be a competent mathematician and have a very, very high numerical score because you're comfortable in dealing with data. And that's often useful for professions like accounting, commercial professions, quantitative professions, because in those professions, often, not always, but often, you may not be doing very complicated things with maths or with numbers, but you need to be comfortable manipulating them. A bit like a lawyer needs to be comfortable with words, an accountant needs to be comfortable with numbers, but they don't necessarily have to do hugely complicated algebra with it. The final score in this group, which is the information group, so that's the verbal, numerical, abstract reasoning, this score is less reliant on knowledge than numerical or verbal, and it looks at your ability to deal with complex problems. And so it is quite correlated with mathematics and science, particularly at a high level. So someone who wanted to become a particle physicist and work at CERN, I'd expect their abstract score to be very high. Their other scores could be very high too, but if they were proposing to do very advanced mathematics or science, I'd expect the abstract score to be very high. Some things to note about these sorts of people is that because they sometimes rely on their brain power to solve problems, they may not like using information that much, learnt information. They may struggle to memorize. And also they can sometimes have a tendency to wing it because they can rely on kind of getting by with their high reasoning ability, and therefore there's a risk sometimes they underperform their ability. So it's really important, a sort of word of warning is if you've got a predominant abstract score and it's a very high abstract score, make sure you're applying yourself, because you are the kind of person who probably does need a challenge. If you're not challenged, you may get a bit bored. So there's an irony there that you may be a little bit more likely to get bored at school potentially, but you actually really do need to apply to yourself, so you're leaving open opportunities in the future to keep yourself stimulated. Okay, so the aptitudes, they look at how we deal with different types of information, and the differences indicate our preference with different types of information. So, high verbal, prefer words, high numerical, prefer numbers. And some people, when they're learning or studying, they might prefer to look at written information. That's my preference. Others may prefer diagrams or numbers. People who've got high reasoning, where that's particularly prominent, I often find that if they just take notes, they can sometimes find that a little bit not productive on its own, and actually applying their learning and doing lots of past papers and solving problems, that's a good way to help their knowledge stick. These strengths, particularly verbal, numerical, abstract, they can underlie academic performance, and the patterns can indicate what style of learning might suit you best. Please do note that more is not always better. So it is actually about the pattern of the profile that can indicate success. So if you've got a very high verbal profile, if you've got a high verbal profile and average numerical and abstract. You may be very, very successful in many, many professions if you follow up that sort of aptitude profile. Whereas if you were to go into something like physics, you might not be as successful. So it is important to look at the pattern rather than the level. And in a similar spirit, please note that an average result is not a poor result. It is the most common result. 40% of the population will be in the average band. So many highly successful people will have average scores in most areas. Again, it's the pattern that's important, going with your relative strengths. So don't think average is bad. It isn't. All right, so that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. To keep you engaged, I've got some questions for you. So I'd like you to have a look at these different profile patterns, and I want you to think about, for each one, what careers, degrees, A-levels, and learning styles might suit these profile shapes. So I'm going to allow you 5 minutes to discuss that with your family members, and then you can write in the chat, maybe if you preface it with the number, what careers, degrees, A-levels, learning styles might suit these profiles. Okay, so I'll give you 5 minutes to have a little chat about that and think about it, just to test your understanding and make sure you're still awake. I'm just going to publish this question, which is: do aptitudes, interests, and work style have equal weightings when suggesting careers, as some interests seem to contradict pupil views? They are broadly equally weighted. When we get to the final, so sometimes something might have come up that's more ability based, and something might come up that's more interest based. When you get to the career suggestion section later, you can actually specify whether you want to weight your career suggestions more towards your aptitudes, more towards your personality, more towards your interest. So you can get different ideas based on what you want to weight more. So there's a way to kind of think about that in a bit more depth. You'll see what I mean hopefully later. And if I, for whatever reason, don't answer that properly, feel free to contact me and I can explain it. So we're already getting some answers in. For number 1, lecturer. I think that could be. I can understand why it'd be a lecturer. It'd be interesting. What do you think? A lecturer in what, though? What subject? Because they might not be a great lecturer in all subjects. But I would agree that could be a lecturer's profile. Number 4, a politician. Interesting to see why you would say that. Why a politician? Okay, I'm going to start going through with some of these answers that people have posted. So, number one, a lecturer. Yeah, I think if they have that sort of shape, you might not be surprised if they were an English lecturer or something like that. If they were, you'd expect probably a lecturer who was a physicist or or a mathematician to have high verbal, but also probably high abstract and potentially high numerical. Number two, an architect. Yes, this could be, a high abstract score can correlate with working spatially. Note that I'm going to come on to a few other scores that are potentially relevant to architecture. So these aren't all the aptitudes that were measured. So I might, for an architect, I might want to look at another score that I'm going to come on to in a moment. Blood spatter analyst. I'd be interested to understand. I don't even know what a blood spatter analyst does. Is that a sort of CSI career? Everyone loves CSI, don't they? Yeah, I mean, I suppose sort of anything scientific, number two would suit. Particle physicist for number two, yes. Number three, an accountant. Yeah, that classic commercial profile. Maybe a little bit less interested in kind of interpersonal type jobs, more commercial type jobs. That doesn't mean you don't have to be good interpersonally in a commercial setting, but you also have to have that love of data and sort of business and those kinds of things. There was an interesting one there, yes. The person who said scientist, accountant. Yeah, number five, actually, it's what we call a flat profile. So that's someone who maybe likes to, it's quite important that they use their range of skills because they have different sorts of skills. So something like marketing, where you have to do data, you have to maybe think creatively, you might, there might be elements of communicating with people. That could potentially suit someone with a flat profile, or someone who runs a small business where they're dealing with lots of different things, from the marketing and the sales to the accounts, that kind of thing. All right, I'm going to move on. In terms of, no one really put down any A levels, but I don't think. But it kind of maps onto what we've just discussed before, so I won't go on about that too much. I'm not sure anyone put anything for number four. Number four is someone who is maybe less commercially motivated, but highly, potentially highly cerebral. So they might, whereas the number three might be more interested in data, the number four might be more interested in the outcomes for people. So they've got a high functioning abstract brain, but they also like words and potentially like dealing with people. So things like psychotherapy, for example, there are those sorts of people orientated careers that require quite high level abstract high level abstract and computational ability. They might be less motivated by kind of just money and more commercial quantitative things. Right, so I'm just going to, this kind of summarizes in a little bit more detail the answers to, or not the answers, some suggestions of what careers might suit what profile. So I'll just give you a few moments to read over that. If you ever got any comments, I can pick those up later on. Yeah, and I'm just picking out a few other answers that people gave. Number five, a management consultant. Yeah, I can see how a management consultant who may have to advise on a wide range of business functions may have to have quite a broad ability set. So they have to be able to go through the accounts and identify where the problems are, but they might be giving advice on HR or marketing or whatever it might be. Another person points out actuary for number three. I'd say yes. I probably, with an actuary, my understanding is being an actuary is really very mathematical. So that high numerical might also want to be supported by a high abstract. So they might look a little bit like a mix of number 2 and number 3 because of the complex maths that's in actuarial science. If you know actuaries know different to that, please do correct me, but that would be my understanding. But you know, sometimes these things oversimplify, and that's kind of what my next point is. Why do we need to be careful about making decisions based on just these aptitude scores? So that's the question. Any suggestions? Why do we need to be a bit careful about that? Do excuse, I have quite a dry throat, so I'm having some San Pellegrino lemon aid. So why might we have to be careful relying on just these aptitude scores, whether that's for making career decisions or A-level decisions or what have you? Number 4 is a Morrisby feedback host. Very good. That's probably right. That's actually a little bit what my profile's like. So you're not far off the mark there. Yeah, it's not a complete picture of people. That's, you know, this only looks at aptitudes, and it, as we've seen already, it doesn't look at all aptitudes. It may not properly capture people's aptitudes. At this stage, we haven't looked at interests, motivations, personality. So it is just one part of the person, and it may not necessarily be an accurate representation. It gives us ideas, it gives us, it's suggestive, but it isn't definitive. And it may also oversimplify, as we saw with when we were talking about the actuary. Actually, they might be a mixture of different aptitudes, and with an accountant, you may have high numerical score, but you actually, if you're a management accountant, you might want a high verbal score because you're having to manage people. So it can be oversimplistic. The other thing is it doesn't take account of all abilities. We talked about those talents before: sporting, acting, those kinds of talents which it just cannot assess. But also there are other more practical abilities that are often not assessed. So the Morrisby has tried to deal with that. So there is a test called spatial ability that your thoughts will have done, and that looks at your ability to think spatially, particularly to convert from 2D to 3D. So you remember when I said about the architect earlier, I'd expect for an architect, while the abstract might be quite high, the numerical might be quite high, you probably have a high spatial as well. And then there's mechanical ability, which looks at your ability to see how things fit together in a quite a practical way. So, you know, understanding how engines work, or a washing machine, or in this case cogs. Is that kind of practical ability, and it's one that you'd unsurprisingly associate with the trades, but not necessarily just the trades. It doesn't mean that someone couldn't be highly academic and not also have a high score here. But you know, if you had a very high mechanical score, but you did very well academically, yes, you could become a plumber. But what sort of careers do you think some students from Surbiton go off to do when their mechanical is very high, but they've also got at least average to high scores in some of those other areas? What do you think they might go off to do? Say if their abstract and mechanical was solid, and they also had a very high mechanical score. Sorry, abstract and numerical was solid, and they also had a high mechanical score. Any idea what kind of things might a Surbiton student go off to do? I haven't known one to become a plumber yet, so that's but there's nothing wrong with them doing that. My brother has 5 houses, or four flats, and he's a plumber. I should have gone into the family business. Any suggestions? Engineering, yeah, so engineering is an obvious one. Architecture is another obvious one, with the spatial, for example. Yeah, things like surveying as well. Things sort of often people where these are the predominant schools, but it's supported with the other schools as well, often look at vocational degrees, so degrees that are quite career related. I'd be surprised if someone who's very predominant in the mechanical area was and lower in the other areas was absolutely gripped by philosophy. They're more interested in maybe how does that plane fly than what is whether God exists or not. So yeah, this is just summarizing what I said. Really, it indicates how practical, down to earth the person is, and interested in sort of real things when this is the predominant score. Okay, so this is something I've actually last year I did this presentation in year 11. I normally do it in year 10, so I've carried over some of the advice to the year 11s. I don't want you to worry about A-level choices yet, but I just want to kind of stress how the Morrisby and particularly the aptitude section can help you making your A-level choices. So it's a little bit of a tangent here, but I think it's an important one. What we find with university, and one of the reasons our students do very well in their A-levels and then in accessing the university courses and universities they want, is that 3 strong A-level grades gives you the most choice. It's important to be mindful of myths about required A-levels for certain degrees or universities. So you might hear things like, for a law degree, Latin looks good, or regardless of the degree, for certain elite universities, it would look nice if you had maths, regardless if there's any maths in the degree or not. And actually what we find is 3 strong grades in whatever subjects is what opens up those courses to you. The other thing is, even if a particular subject is required, for example, chemistry for medicine, you need to also ask at A-level, not GCSE, at A-level, is this something that I'm going to do very well in? Because for medicine, you're going to need to get an A at A-level. It won't just be about having chemistry, it'll be about having a high grade at A-level. And while an 8 or a 9 at GCSE is suggestive that you look like a realistic prospect for an A-level, it's not always definitive. So it's important that when you're making your A-level choices, you are looking at how you do in your GCSEs, but you're also looking at other data. And one of those bits of data is the Morrisby. So I have seen students who've got 9s in physics, say, but their profile is predominantly verbal with average scores elsewhere. And sometimes those students underperform at A-level in a subject that isn't aligned with their Morrisby profile. So it's something to be aware of. I'd also say be wary of taking a random subject if it happens to be one where there can be a big step up at A-level. So sometimes you find, for example, someone is probably going to apply for a humanities degree. That's where their interest lies. They are more interested in words, but they think, oh, I'd like just a science in there. And that can be a risky move in case you end up that's probably the area that if it's least aligned with your abilities, you're most likely to drop a grade at A-level. So I'd be wary of taking a random subject just because it provides a contrast, or only think about that if you're on its own merits, you're very strong in that subject. In subjects like physics, maths, engineering, computer science at universities, I should say at most competitive universities, consider further maths as a 4th A-level if you are very good at maths, but always get advice from the maths department, and you will almost certainly be doing further maths GCSE. That doesn't mean you can't do those subjects without further maths, but there may be a few courses, or the very mathematical end of this end of the spectrum courses in those areas where further maths may be helpful. So for example, engineering at Cambridge, it's even by engineering standards, it's a very mathematical course, so having further maths is useful. Economics at somewhere like Cambridge or the LSE is very mathematical, so they often like further maths, but you will have plenty of options in those areas with single maths. And I would just say that a high Morrisby profile is not a guarantee of academic success. I have seen students who've got very high profiles and they don't necessarily excel academically, so it shouldn't be read like that. The key thing to note is that if your profile is more average in certain areas, that may suggest caution with certain subjects. So, for example, if you've got a low verbal score, that you might want to be looking at whether some of the written subjects are relevant for you. And if for example, the abstract and numerical are sort of average or low, and you're thinking about sciences, just something to check. But these are things that you don't need to make decisions about yet. I'm just flagging it up, putting it out there so you know it's a tool that can be used. And with that in mind, and I know I briefed all the students quite thoroughly when they were doing the Morrisby, but if you feel that you didn't try your best in the aptitude sections, just do contact Miss Lecky at those contact details there, and it may be possible to retake your aptitudes or one of your aptitudes if you think you really were distracted or you didn't try your best, particularly if you think the Morrisby looking at it doesn't represent you accurately. Okay, so we've looked at the aptitude assessments. Now let's have a quick look at the other assessments. And they are personality, aspirations, interests, aspiration is the word for interest, priorities, and your study interests. Now, note, a lot of you haven't done your priorities and study interest questionnaires. They are optional. You don't have to do them, but just be aware it's something that you could do. And so I'll flag those up to you in a moment. The personality section of Morrisby is based on Myers-Briggs, and it's self-report. Okay, so that means that you are asked questions, and it's your interpretation of you give your own response to those questions. You kind of know maybe what they're getting at, whereas other personality test, the old Morrisby personality test was objective. You got made to do various weird and wonderful things like writing as many words as you can think of that are associated with being yellow and green, and that actually was measuring a particular personality trait. Okay, so this is more subjective, more about your own self-report, and you were asked questions like this. Others would say that I am logical or imaginative, and then you'd be given a scaled answer there. And then you are on those measures. It indicates what you're more like. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You can read the interpretation, but if you don't agree with it, this should be reasonably accurate, but if you don't agree with it, you've always got the option to retake the questionnaire. Whereas with the aptitude, you can't do that unless you contact us, and there's a good reason. With the personality, if you thought this does not represent me at all, you could retake the questionnaire, and we could discuss why does this not seem to reflect you, and look at your answers. The other part to these other assessments was your interests or aspirations questionnaire. And that looks at your interest in working with people in different ways. That could be caring, but that could be persuading, things like sales, information, but are you more interested in written information or more numbers and things? Is that more science-based? Is that more art design-based? You'll note here again that certain interests that can't be measured as accurately, so that aligns with also again those ability aptitudes which can't be measured as accurately by Morrisby or at all. They're flagged here. Okay, and again you can retake your questionnaire, and that's really important because this particularly is likely to change a lot. The more things you do, the more career research you do, the more living you do, basically, your views here may change significantly. And you've got access to this for the rest of your life. So you can come back at 25, redo this in light of your experience and get new career suggestions. So it's really, really helpful in that regard. And sometimes I find students don't necessarily see it as being useful at this point, but later on, when they reach out to us, we have another discussion and inevitably say, well, why don't you redo your interest questionnaire in your Morrisby? It can be really quite revelatory for them. Mindful of the time, so I think I'm going to skip through the next sections. They're fairly self-explanatory. I just say to you the priorities, which looks at what you want to get out of your career. That can be done there. A lot of you haven't done that questionnaire, so you just click that and take the questionnaire, and then you'll get these results. and it looks at, are you more reward focused? Is there a more social element to your motivations, etc., etc.? And then there's an interpretation down the bottom here. But again, these are things that could change. You may think that money is the be all and end all. You go into a career that's very lucrative and you're not very motivated by it. So this is something that may change with time, just like the interest, and you've got that capacity to change, retake your questionnaire if you want to. Then there's the study interest questionnaire. So this is something that, again, a lot of you haven't completed, but you can complete here by clicking on this tab, and that will give you sort of degree suggestions. So I just want to now show you what this will all produce. You'll get career suggestions. So up here are what are the things that you've interacted with, the things that you've indicated are your favorite careers. Okay, your actual career suggestions without any interaction or favoriting are listed below that. So you'll get 12 career suggestions. And this will give you an indication here, this rating bar of how suited you are to them. And then you remember earlier there was someone who asked about the balance. So generally speaking, it's an even balance, but you can adjust your career suggestions based on aptitudes, interests, personality to see what difference that makes. Okay. So that's worth knowing to get, so you can get more career suggestions. You'll also notice here it says there's a little hazard sign, and that's next to most of these career suggestions here. That's because in the thing I'm going to show you in a moment, the student has indicated they don't intend to do A-levels, which are necessary for being a pharmacist or a sports scientist. So this will highlight when you complete the A-level questionnaire, which I'll show you in a moment, whether there are any issues with you accessing the career you're talking about with your education choices. Okay. Likewise, so you'll notice here these career suggestions. You can also play with the qualification entries. So in the previous slide, we saw if you obtained a degree, what career suggestions you have. If you decide actually, I just want to focus on apprenticeships, I just want to go straight into employment, that can change your career suggestions. Okay, but just do play with that, because if you take out the entering full employment and just put focus on apprenticeships, some of those other career suggestions reappear. So it is possible to enter high-level careers with apprenticeships now. There are law apprenticeships where you can qualify as a solicitor. So it is no longer the case that university is absolutely necessary for entering some of the high-level professions. There may be very many good reasons why you would do it, and there are still many careers where you do need a university degree, but I don't want people to think that it is actually as mandatory or is mandatory necessarily. And then you can, each of your career sessions you can click to find out more. If one of the careers that you're interested in doesn't appear, you can search for that down here in this Find a Careers tab. All right. So for example, say I got all these science suggestions and I thought, actually, I want to be a social media influencer. If you type in social media, you do find careers like social media manager. And then here it will give you a rating of how suited you are to that career. So it might be worth having a discussion if something doesn't come up and the rating is low, of why that might be when you have your careers interview. Likewise, that rating might be very high, because if you behind the Morrisby system, although you've only got 12 career suggestions, those go on for infinity. So your 13th career suggestion, which doesn't appear, or 15th, might be your dream career. So just do play with it, because you might find that even if the initial career suggestions are not what you were thinking, there are some other ones just hiding if you play with the functionality a bit. And so these, if you click at a particular career suggestion or a career you've looked up, you can find out about what it's about, key facts, salaries, etc. Take sometimes the salaries with a pinch of salt, what it takes, what kind of skills you need, day-to-day life. There's some videos here. Be aware some of them are sort of like Open University circa 1990. So, but some of them are good. So don't be put off if it's particularly dated, is what I'm saying. If you scroll down further for career suggestion, it will give you information about what GCSEs, degree level qualifications you need to get into that career. Also alternative routes in like apprenticeships, and then that's also shown diagrammatically here. Related careers, if you scroll down further, and then further resources for finding out more about that career. And that can be useful because there may be events that a professional body for that industry puts on where you can find out more about the career. If you don't have contacts into that career, there's often a list of of companies working there that you might be able to approach for work experience. So have a look at further resources if once you've done that initial reading on Morrisby, you think, oh, that's for me. Okay, so there is another section which is options at 16. But what I'm going to say about this is treat this bit with a pinch of salt, because it sort of lists it lists A-level suggestions, but based just on your career suggestions. So you may say that you're really interested in a particular A-level. Actually, when you research that A-level, it is not you're not as suited to it, and it might not actually represent your suitability for that particular A-level. I didn't explain that very well, but all I'm saying is just check with us and with your teachers your A-level choices. Don't just rely on the Morrisby here. But what this is useful for is if you indicate whether you're going to take it or not, that will then feed into the career suggestions that we saw and highlight if you're missing an A-level subject you need. So if you remember that hazard sign next to a particular career, by completing this with the A-levels you intend to take, you can see whether for your career suggestions or a career you've added, whether you've got the right A-levels for it. Okay, so that's quite a nice, interesting functionality there. But although those suggestions are based on your career suggestions, don't necessarily think that they are telling you should do that subject. They might be suggesting it, but definitely have further discussion with teachers and with us in the careers department when you have your careers interviews. You then also got a tab here. So options at that was A-level choices there, destinations, and then click options at 18, and then that lists your degree suggestions, which come from that study interest questionnaire I mentioned earlier. If you go in there, it will prompt you, and you haven't completed it, it will prompt you to take it. And if you've already done it, you can retake it any time. So one thing we get all students in sixth form to do is retake their study interest questionnaire to reflect any changes in their views. And then again, a bit like careers, you can research the contents there. So next steps will be in year 11, autumn term. You'll have a careers interview with one of the careers department. We'll go over your Morrisby profile. We will discuss A-level ideas in particular, but also careers in university and links between A-levels and careers. There'll also be an opportunity to discuss work experience, which takes place at the end of year 11. And you'll all get an interview write-up with an action plan, which actually, as well as being emailed to you, goes on the Morrisby profile in the career and interview meetings tab. Okay, so it's kind of a one-stop shop. So in summary, Morrisby is invaluable for short, medium and long-term planning. It's in the near term, it's going to be really helpful with your A-level choices. We do have the best value added of any school at A-level in the Southwest London area over the last 3 years, and Morrisby has played a role in that. I've been here 9 years, I know. So make the most of it, and when you come for your careers interview, really do have had a thought about what A-levels you think you might want to do, what careers you want to do, but don't put pressure on yourself to make those decisions yet. That's kind of what the career interview is about, and subsequent meetings you will have with tutors, teachers through year 11. So have a think about it, but don't think you've got to come with your choices made. All right, I'm now going to deal with any questions. I apologise. It's quite hard to field lots and lots of questions while you're delivering a presentation. So I'm just going to review what's been posted. So I've got a question there about, has any work been done to examine if the Morrisby protocol needs to reflect the change on the workplace given the hybrid model of work from home remotely versus in the office? I do not know. I imagine, given that is very current, it probably hasn't been done yet, but it's something I could pass on to them. What I would say is they're always updating the career suggestions because they are mindful that 50% of the careers that the students will go on to do may not have been invented yet. So it's over time, and that's a good thing about it being dynamic, is that over time new careers will be added, and you may find that when you go back and redo your questionnaire that careers that have not even been invented have been added. But it's also something that is more generally trying to get students to, and if there are, I know there are some parents who did this, by the way, to have a resource for research and understand the importance of research, and understand the importance of work experience over the next few years of their lives. That they've got these holidays that are invaluable opportunities to really start exploring their Morrisby suggestions and any other careers they want to. I just saw a question there, which was, what constitutes a high rating for the suggested careers? I'm not sure I understand what that means. If you want to reword that question, in terms of how they've generated the careers, what they've done is they've profiled people in those careers, and then that map those on over a long period of time, and map those on to the profile, the test results of those who take it, so that they can give those career suggestions. But there will inevitably a range. You know, you could have a lawyer who's got slightly above average verbal, and then you could have one who's got verbal that's off the chart. You know, so there is a range. There's a question about, does the school help with identifying appropriate work experience? The answer is yes. There's a lot of support from Miss Leckie in year 11 and beyond, so don't worry about that. For students who are unsure of their next step, what advice do you have? Think about A-levels or career first. I would work from what they're good at the moment, and what their passions are now, rather than necessarily work backwards. But for those things that do require a specific degree, so the obvious candidates are medicine, architecture, things like that, it's worth arranging work experience or career exploration before you make your final choices in at the end of year 11 or the summer between year 11 and year 12. But I think, for example, if someone says, I want to be a doctor, and actually they don't like chemistry very much, I would be more guided by not liking chemistry very much. You know, it's a how long's a piece of string. If they're like, I enjoy chemistry fairly, but I really have done work experience and think this is the most wonderful profession ever, that might be sufficient to pursue medicine. But I think if you really don't like science very much, but you're interested in the kind of helping career, there might be other helping careers out there that suit you better. The career interviews will be in autumn term of year 11. That's another question there. Yeah, autumn term of year 11. Someone said that my daughter's numerical score was average, high, average, but she's in the top math and enjoys it. Does her aptitude score indicate she should not go into maths or a science career? Not necessarily. As I said before, the maths, that the numerical score isn't necessarily indicative of mathematical ability or interest. I'd also want to look at what her abstract score is. So not necessarily. But that's something I would discuss in your career interview. That point. There was a question earlier about how special educational needs like dyslexia might affect the results. I think that's something that's best discussed in the careers interview. Morrisby don't adjust for educational needs in that way. Their view is that it's looking at what a student can do, and that isn't. And often you will find that a student, for example, who's highly dyslexic can get a very high verbal score. I've seen that many times, and actually they are very verbally able. They may just have some issues with writing. They may also be an excellent writer, but they may just have issues with spelling and arrangement of sentences. But they've got excellent ideas. So it's Morrisby. We have had that conversation a number of times with Morrisby, and it's something they're quite firm about. But it's something we can discuss on an individual basis in the career interviews. There was a question there about learning styles. My advice is that learning styles is actually a tab in the Morrisby profile, so you can click that. If that's something that you want to discuss, feel free to contact us, or your daughter could raise in the careers interview. So, for example, I mentioned before someone with a very predominant abstract score who maybe is maybe approaching their revision using just notes, and maybe that's not proving particularly effective in exams. Could they try a much higher use of past papers? But there is a breakdown of learning style in the Morrisby. It's one of the tabs at the top. So if you have a look there, but feel free to raise that at the careers interview, or contact us about that particular question vis-a-vis your daughter. There's a question about portfolio careers. I mean, I suppose in a way, if your portfolio careers kind of quite map on in the sense that some people, particularly those with flat profiles, may suit a portfolio career where they can do different things that make use of their different abilities. Sometimes when someone's got a flat profile and they've got a lot of different abilities and they focus a bit too much on one area that aligns with a particular ability, that can be an issue. So a portfolio career can be a way to deal with that feeling that maybe you're not using your full suite of abilities properly. In the careers interviews, will you challenge the students' ideas if thought less suitable? Gently, but not. Our job is sort of to ask questions that get them to self-reflect. If there are various interventions that happen over the course of year 11, where if someone's going for an A-level where we've got serious concerns, that will be raised, but that probably won't come from the careers interview. The careers interview is the first discussion, but it is very much encouraging them to reflect, encouraging them to research. So, for example, if their profile raised the question about doing sciences, that they speak to their science teachers, they speak to various other people it isn't really our job to say no, you shouldn't do that. That's quite an old-fashioned approach to careers guidance. But we will encourage them to reflect and to research to answer those questions for themselves. I think I'm going to make this the last question, because I've got a dentist appointment very early in the morning tomorrow. Does the school help with, yes, okay. How does the school measure value add at A level? How does the school measure value add at A level? It is, well, there are two ways you could measure it. If you go on a government website, they basically look at students' GCSE results and then they look at the A level results, and you can kind of predict. It's not as subtle, but you can predict what the value add is, and in that respect, Surbiton performs very highly, particularly over several years. If you look at several years worth of data, there is I can't remember the name of the website, but you can find that online. It's a government website. With Surbiton, we use that, but also other psychometrics, not the Morrisby, to that are done at the beginning of A levels, so that you can project what you might expect a student to get. And in some subjects, our students achieve one grade higher than you would expect them based on their GCSEs and psychometric score. So we do add a lot of value. That the stats are there, but I'm not a statistician, so if you want more info on that, you might be better placed asking some other teachers. Okay, I'll make this the last question. I wouldn't worry too much about A-level subjects and the timeline. That will be gone over very clearly, and there's a number of steps, and it does change a bit year to year. But what generally happens is you're asked for first intentions just after the careers interviews are completed, so just after Christmas, and then there's confirmed intentions, and then a few, I think maybe about a month after that. So there are a number of points at where we're asked for A-level ideas before the option blocks are drawn up. But the option blocks, as in the timetable, are drawn up around the students' choices, which is quite unusual. So we try to accommodate as many students as possible with their choices, their final choices. And then after that, any changes are subject to the option blocks. Often that's possible. So you will have lots of changes on GCSE result day when students have got their results, but that is subject to the timetable which is written then, and it's also subject to there being availability in the classes. But generally speaking, most changes, even on results day, can be accommodated, but it can't be guaranteed. Whereas before the timetable is written, every effort is made to accommodate girls' choices. It's not absolutely guaranteed, but every effort is made. All right, I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, everyone. If you have any further questions, please do email me at the careers department. And I look forward to meeting the students in year 11 for their careers interviews.